The story begins with a girl named So Young walking down a dark alley when two people start suddenly following her. She begins to run from them, but they ultimately catch up and attack her. Just then, a man named Louis appears and takes out the thugs. However, the terrified So Young immediately runs away too. The following day, we see So Young dozing off at school when our friend June arrives in a vampire mask and scares her. Annoyed by his antics, she walks away while he follows her. The two then go to a flower shop that used to belong to So Young's mother before she died. Since So Young is very fond of flowers, June picks one and hands it to her, but she refuses to accept it and they begin to argue. Suddenly, a thorn from the blossom pricks her finger and she starts to bleed. She then storms out of the shop while June continues to follow her. Just then, Louis arrives at the flower shop and we learn he's a vampire. The florist is delighted to see him and begins flirting with him. Louis then senses So Young's blood, which smells irresistible, and he asks the florist what sort of flower it is. He starts looking for the flower relentlessly, but soon discovers that the smell is actually coming from a drop of blood. Louis is determined to find the girl who cut her finger, so the florist reveals that her name is So Young. In the next scene, Louis meets with two of his members of his coven, Bacon and Akon, and tells them about the girl. It turns out they've been searching for something called the vampire flower. Louis believes So Young can help them find it, so he orders his henchmen to find out more about her. The following day, Bacon and Akon visit the school and greet the security guard, who happens to be a vampire. They get So Young's address from him and decide to head over there. Meanwhile, at So Young's house, June tries to follow her inside, but she kicks him out. He claims that he only wants to protect her in case there are vampires, but she says she isn't afraid of such things. After June leaves, Louis appears at the door and she recognizes him from the night before. He walks in without saying anything and discovers that the place is a mess. He then picks up her intimates, causing So Young to panic. She tries to take them from him, but instead falls into his arms. When she looks into his eyes, she sees their red color and realizes he's a vampire. Terrified, So Young threatens to call the cops if he doesn't leave, but Louis uses his power to take her phone. She tries to flee, but he moves from one location to another at lightning speed and stops her. He then tells her that she's a troublemaker and throws her onto the bed. Louis says he's looking for the vampire flower that was stolen by humans 150 years ago, and he needs her help to find it. That evening, Louis introduces Bacon and Akon to So Young and informs her that they will all be living in the house until they find the flower. He also tells her that she will be protected during this time. He then forces her to sign a contract, and as soon as she does, a necklace appears around her neck. The following day at school, So Young tries to lay low, hoping to avoid Louis. Just then, a security guard arrives to check on her, and she notices his eyes are red as well. Later on, she crosses paths with a man named Reka and notices that his eyes are red as well. As she arrives home, she starts to think that she's insane, seeing vampires everywhere. She then notices that Bacon and Akon have taken it upon themselves to make some changes to the house. She finds a new painting on the wall, and although the guys explain that the picture is of Louis' house, she gets mad at them for hanging it up. Just then, Louis arrives and informs her that she will follow his rules while he's there. Later, Louis and So Young visit a flower shop in search of the vampire flower. She asks him what the flower looks like, and he claims he doesn't know, but will recognize it when he sees it. He then reveals that the flower holds limitless power, and whoever possesses it will be able to become the lord and ruler of all vampires. Later on, Louis meets his friend Reka, who informs him that a vampire named Ashel has been attacking a number of young people. Reka encourages Louis to find the flower before Ashel does. The following day at school, So Young is searching the internet for vampire flowers. One of her friends points out to June how distracted So Young has been recently. She also talks to the attractive boy who hangs out around school and plans to ask for his phone number. Just then, So Young thinks she's found the flower and runs to find Louis. On the way, So Young hears a distant scream. Louis hears it as well and rushes to the location where he finds Ashel attacking So Young's friend. Ashel flees when he sees Louis checking on the girl. Just then, So Young arrives and sees Louis with her friend, and she believes he attacked her. Later at home, she confronts Louis about the attack. She believes that he drank her blood, but Louis tries to explain that she misunderstood the situation and he does not drink blood. However, she does not believe him and storms off. Louis meets with Reka again, who reminds him that his goal is to find the flower, not to protect the insignificant human. But Louis says that Reka himself was born a human, and he has made a promise to protect So Young. Later, the two go to see the Grand Elder, who turns out to be the school's security guard. They then discuss how Ashel has been murdering people in order to drink their blood. The Elder then informs Louis that he must complete a coming-of-age ritual, or he won't be able to defeat Ashel. The following morning, Akon and Bacon make So Young a delicious breakfast. As they eat together, she asks why they feel like humans and don't consume blood. The two then inform her that they used to drink blood, but over time they learned to respect the human world and stop drinking it. They claim that drinking blood provides them with vitality, but it can also cause them to lose their emotions and senses. Later at school, Jejun approaches So-young saying that he hasn't seen her in days and is worried about her. He then returns her phone, which she dropped the day before, but she doesn't even thank him and simply runs off to find the flower. After wandering in a shop for a while, she finds a flower that she believes is the vampire flower. To avoid being seen, she picks it up secretly and places it in her bag. However, suddenly a shell appears in front of her and knocks her out. Seconds later, Louis arrives to protect her, but it's too late. In the next scene, So-young awakens tied to a chair in an abandoned building. But suddenly, Louis appears, and the two vampires engage in a fierce fight. However, the more competent and experienced Ashel easily overpowers Louis. Fortunately, Reika arrives to back him up, and when he realizes he can't win, Ashel leaves. After having passed out again, So-young awakens and Reika begins flirting with her, which Louis doesn't like. So he kisses her in front of everyone, and a mark appears on her neck staking his claim on her. Louis then informs her that Reika will also be staying with them for now. Later, So-young is still feeling weird about the kiss, so Louis apologizes and explains that what he did was to protect her, and that the mark symbolizes that they are now a couple. She then hands him the flower that she picked earlier, but he tells her that it's not the vampire flower. So-young is disappointed, and Louis realizes how much she adores flowers. So, the next day he goes to the florist and places the flower in a pot so it doesn't die. When Louis gets home, he finds So-young sound asleep, so he places the flower pot next to her. He tells her that her mother must have loved her, but he has never been loved by anyone. Louis then kisses her on the cheek and leaves, after which we see that So-young was awake the entire time. Later on, she speaks with Reika and asks about Louis' past. Reika informs her that vampires are born from human women, but when Louis' mother found out that he was a vampire, she tried to kill him. When asked about his father, Reika jokingly says that Louis ate him, which scares the crap out of So-young. The following day, Louis accompanies So-young to school where they meet the Grand Elder, aka the security guard, and So-young is surprised to discover that he is also a vampire. The Grand Elder reminds Louis that his coming-of-age ceremony is approaching and that they must be prepared. Later, at the Grand Elder's home, he tells So-young that he loves Louis like his own son. She asks about Louis' biological father and if he truly ate him. The Grand Elder replies that Louis' father offered his own blood and life to save his son after his mother tried to kill him. After So-young leaves, a shell arrives at the Grand Elder's home and attacks him. Louis tries to intervene, but to no avail. In his dying breath, the Grand Elder tells Ashel that he will never find the flower because it no longer exists and has been extinct for years. He then tells Louis not to blame himself for his death and to take care of So-young. After the Grand Elder dies, Ashel attacks Louis, but before he can kill him, Reika comes to the rescue. That evening, Louis is unconscious and in critical condition. So-young is very upset by this, so she cuts her hand to give him blood, after which she passes out. When Louis drinks the blood, he regains strength and awakens, although he feels guilty about her sacrifice. He then decides that the coming-of-age ritual is the only way to put an end to Ashel. The following day, Louis thanks So-young for sacrificing her blood for him. The two then spend the rest of the day hanging out, eating, and having a good old time. Upon arriving home, So-young realizes that Bacon and Akon are leaving and that the painting has been taken down. Louis informs her that since the vampire flower no longer exists, they have decided to leave her alone. Hearing this, So-young becomes upset, so Louis tells her that he was only using her. She refuses to believe it, claiming that they're in a relationship and he can't abandon her like this. Having no other choice, Louis then erases her memory of him, but decides to leave the necklace with her. The following day, So-young wakes up with no memories of Louis or any other vampires. Later at school, Louis and Reika notice So-young hanging out with Jejun. Our hero is upset as he believes she's unfaithful, but Reika informs him that it's his own fault for erasing her memories. Reika then asks why he left the necklace, to which Louis replies that he left it as a gift. That evening, Louis completes his coming-of-age ceremony, and his eyes turn golden. Meanwhile, Ashel kidnaps So-young and asks her about the flower, but she, of course, knows nothing. He then grabs the necklace, which begins to glow, and she recalls her memories of Louis. Ashel prepares to drink her blood, but before he can do so, the now much stronger Louis arrives to kick his ass. Reika also arrives, and together, they end up killing Ashel. Afterward, Louis and Reika discuss how the Vampire Lord's post has become available. Louis says that he was never interested in being Lord and leaves. After that, Reika shows his true colors. As it turns out, becoming Lord was his main goal the entire time. Now that the Grand Elder and Ashel are gone, he decides to take out Louis and everyone else who will stand in his way. In the final scene, Louis meets So Young and apologizes for wiping her memories. He gets down on his knees and proposes that she become his exclusive flower, which So Young gladly accepts. The two then embrace and kiss each other as the story comes to an end.